Hello, everyone, and welcome to the LRN Webinar series. So glad you could join us today. This webinar is being recorded and will be available on demand. All registrants will receive a follow-up email with the link to the recording. Today, we're excited to explore a conversation that's becoming increasingly vital across industries. How ethics and compliance are evolving from a check-the-box requirement to a real driver of business performance and strategic growth. At LRN, we've seen firsthand how forward-thinking ethics and compliance teams are reducing organizational friction, enhancing culture, and becoming trusted partners in decision-making. Today's panel brings together exceptional leaders who are doing just that, and we're looking forward to a dynamic discussion about what's working, what's changing, and how you can lead the way inside your own organization. So let's dive in. My name is Neil Magenheim, VP of Client Success here at LRN, and I'm very excited to introduce our two amazing speakers. First, Kim Van Dorn. Kim is the head of ethics and conduct at Capital One Discover and has more than 35 years of financial services management experience, most recently with BNY Mellon, where Kim was managing director, compliance, chief operating officer, and the global head of conduct, culture, and conflicts. Kim has held similar executive roles at Raymond James, Citigroup, Morgan Stanley, and Synchrony. Kim, thank you so much for joining us. Chelsea Azrak is our second speaker. Very excited to have Chelsea join the panel today as well. Chelsea currently serves as Vice President of Law and Compliance at Revlon, where Chelsea leads Revlon's compliance and ethics function. Chelsea plays a pivotal role in shaping company policies, leading compliance training initiatives, conducting internal investigations, and advising on key areas of risk. Chelsea began her legal career as a litigator at Fried Frank, representing Fortune 500 companies and financial institutions in high-stakes litigation, white-collar investigations, and regulatory enforcement. Kim and Chelsea, again, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. Before we get into any of the content, just a few housekeeping items that I wanted to address. One, the opinions shared by our panel today are their own and do not necessarily represent the views of the companies they work for. We will be monitoring the Q&A function throughout our time together today, so please put all your questions in the Q&A function. We'll do our best to get to them later on in our time together. If not, we'll certainly follow up with answers to your questions. And then the third piece from a housekeeping perspective is keep those phones handy. We will have some audience participation throughout our time together today in the form of polling and questions. So keep your phones handy so you all can participate. How are we going to spend our time together today? This session is going to explore the evolving role of ethics and compliance as a strategic business partner. We're going to share real-world examples of ethics and compliance collaborating with HR, finance, and procurement to reduce friction, unlock value, as well as how to use data to strengthen the business case for compliance investment. We're also going to highlight the code of conduct as a tool for alignment and ethical leadership, offer practical strategies to position ethics and compliance as a driver of growth, not just a safeguard. This session will conclude with some Q&A, as I talked about earlier. Very excited, looking forward to this amazing conversation. And let's help frame the conversation a little bit. I'm going to start with a bit of a big idea here. High-performing ethics and compliance programs aren't just about risk mitigation anymore. They're about reducing internal friction, speeding up decisions, building real trust across departments, and driving profitability. Our insight suggests that companies invested in compliance infrastructure were better equipped to navigate challenging business environments, sustain more long-term growth, and protect shareholder value. More and more, we're seeing compliance teams working hand in hand with other business units like HR and finance, legal, and procurement. Why is that? That's because aligning behavior with business goals takes partnership. And when it's done right, it proactively manages risk before it becomes a problem. And here's something to keep in mind as we go into today's discussion. Culture, clarity, and accountability aren't soft values. They are clearly the drivers of performance. When those things are strong, business results follow. So Chelsea, as we frame the conversation, I'm going to start with you. What's your initial reaction to this?
Thanks, Neil, and thanks everyone for joining. To echo some of the great points you made, compliance used to really be seen as a roadblock, but I think that has certainly changed over time. I think we've become trusted partners who really help our teams move faster and work better. Because every function within our organizations touches risk, our job is to embed ethical thinking into the decisions and the culture across many different functions at our organizations. So we'll talk about this a little more, but I think HR is on the slide. HR can really be a strategic ally for us with respect to hotline investigations and code of conduct training and addressing conflicts of interest and more. And HR can act as compliance champions for us. Our teams are often lean and mean, but HR can really help us champion and cascade our messaging and efforts across the organization. Procurement is another team that we can partner with to help manage third-party risk. While procurement may own vendor sourcing and onboarding, I think we can help to co-design the process and support due diligence efforts, contract requirements, and ongoing vendor monitoring. And I would just say one final note to wrap up my comments is that we should not underestimate relationship building. We should understand what each of our business functions does, what the business risk is, in order to offer proactive instead of just reactive support and really become trusted partners across our companies.
Amazing. Super insightful, Chelsea. Thanks. Great way to kick off the conversation. Kim, over to you. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, hello, everybody. Just want to say good morning and thank you for joining. I think Chelsea hit all the high points. And what I want to say is that I can't restate enough the value of ethics and compliance from a competitive advantage perspective. It's really kind of thinking about bringing together the regulatory expectations and the business priorities and making sure that they're aligned. And the only way to do that is collaboration with all of the partners, right? All of the partners that Chelsea named, folks in the business. And it's really important for everyone to understand that everybody at the company owns risk, right? And should have a good understanding of what their responsibilities are. What is the first line of defense responsible for? Second line of defense, third line of defense. And once everybody has a good understanding of their responsibilities and how they should be working together, that helps with risk reduction, right? We want to make sure that ethics and compliance has a seat at the table. And one thing we'll probably talk about a little bit later is the importance of metrics and reporting, and how metrics and reporting should be more than just numbers, right? It should show our collective progress from an impact lens. So we can go into more of that later, but those are just some of the things that I would highlight in this space.
Amazing, Kim. Great highlights for sure to start framing the conversation. So I'm going to ask everyone to get their phones ready as we transition over to the first poll question of our webinar this morning. Take about 15 or 20 seconds here to answer the question. Okay. We will report back on the results of this as our time together progresses. What I'd like to do now is frame the conversation a bit about where companies stand and where we see the high performers are pulling ahead. What we're seeing across the board is a bit of a mixed picture. For example, just 31% of organizations include ethics in performance reviews. And only 15% say they're getting strong tone in the middle. What's that strong tone? It's strong tone in the middle. That's that critical layer of mid-level management and mid-level managers. Nearly half assess training comprehension, but often stop there. And more than a third are still tracking investigations manually. But when we look at what high-performing organizations are doing, the differences are clear. They're baking ethics into incentives, KPIs, and evaluations. They're investing in their mid-level managers to lead on culture. They're tying training to outcomes using data and using analytics. And they're using systems not just to track and escalate investigations, but to learn from them and course correct if necessary. This shift from checking boxes to building culture is what separates compliance as a cost from compliance as a competitive advantage and profit driver. So again, separating compliance as a cost from compliance as a competitive advantage and profit driver. That's really the crux of what we're discussing. And Kim, I'm going to start with you to give us your perspective on that.
Sure. Thanks, Neil. I think in this space, culture is everybody's business, right? Risk is everybody's business. Culture is everybody's business. And it should really, those things should really become part of the fabric of the company that you're working on, or that you work at. So I think, some of the things that the high performers are doing are really key, right? Including ethics in interviews when we're hiring people, right? Questions related to that give you a sense of conduct and ethics and just culture from the people who you want to bring on board. Incorporating these things as individual goals for all employees or associates, I think is very important. This should be a part of mid-year reviews or mid-year check-ins, and definitely, if they're goals, they'll be a part of the annual year-end discussions. One thing that's a big opportunity is, the conducting of ethics pulse surveys for all employees to provide them with an opportunity to confidentially or anonymously share information. And the learnings from that can really help guide what we do next, right? The same with investigations and hotline themes. Where do we need to train people? Where do we need or identify an opportunity for education? Whether that's enhancing some of the training that we already have, whether it's some sort of, lunch and learns or more day-to-day type things or articles that we could put on the intranet. All of those things really inform how we move forward with culture and how we embed the culture. I think teaching managers, particularly middle managers, how to address situations that require ethical decisions is really, really important. If you haven't thought about it already, putting together an ethical decision-making tool and even embedding that in your code or just making it come alive in some way is really helpful. You can have training sessions on it for middle managers, use case examples, situations so that folks can discuss and sort of bounce things off of each other. But I think it's extremely important to empower those middle managers with those tools. And just getting back to sort of metrics and analytics, figuring out how to tell a collective, robust story about ethics and compliance at your company is important. So go beyond basic metrics, decide on themes, level sort of existing information that your peers have to really tell the story.
That's great. Great context, great insight, Kim. Thank you. Chelsea, over to you. What are your thoughts on this?
Sure. I think Kim made some really great points. One more comment on the bullet about middle managers, right? I think tone at the top is essential, but our cultures will fail if it doesn't cascade from the top down to the middle, because our middle managers are really sort of boots on the ground, seeing what's happening from a day-to-day basis. And I think while we need to teach middle managers how to escalate concerns to, for example, compliance, middle managers can also be extremely helpful when it comes to cascading or reinforcing compliance or ethics messaging and modeling ethical leadership, right? And there's many more middle managers than there are sort of management at the top. So I think the focus on middle management is really important here. Just a few more points on metrics, right? I think post-training metrics can be very helpful. For example, post-training test scores, right? So if you're training on your code of conduct, for example, and you have quizzes, mini quizzes within your training, you can look at which areas did your employees struggle with? If so, maybe if it's a particular area, we may need to conduct additional training or communications on that topic. And then lastly, when it comes to systems to help track investigations, right? I don't think we all need the most high-end, the most expensive systems. I think as long as we're tracking individual cases, but also looking for trends, right? Trends by region, issue type, and root cause, so that we can so that can enable targeted remediation, right? Do we need to tweak a policy? Do we need a new policy? Is it a cultural issue? Do we need to train in a particular area, or coach our leaders or managers? So I think there's a lot we can do with investigations, tracking, and trends.
So much that we can continue to unpack and dig into from both of your perspectives here. But a couple of things that stood out: completion to comprehension to outcomes is what I heard you say. And when I thinking about using data proactively, right? Those are what high performing organizations and functions do. And that's amazing. So I misinformed the audience, and I apologize. There's no QR code for the poll questions. There is simply a multiple choice question that will be presented to you here. Here we are now on poll question 2. Give it about 15, 20 seconds here. Okay. Thank you for the participation. Oh, here we go. What's your biggest challenge in demonstrating compliance program effectiveness? 49% say lack of metrics and data. Kim, initial reaction to that? Brief initial reaction to that?
I think that makes sense. I think the challenge with metrics and data is how you look at it and how you can sort of be creative in determining what metrics and what data you look at. I would encourage everybody to sort of think beyond just the key performance indicators and key risk indicators, but to really focus on telling the story of ethics and compliance at your organization, right? Look at what some of the things that are being reported by your peers. We early on talked about our peers that we need to collaborate with. And some of those things you can include in your storytelling, right? So instead of just KPIs and KRIs, think about, okay, what do we want to say about tone at the top and tone at the middle? And what are the metrics and what things are being reported that can really give us a story around that? How do we look at employee behavior, right? And what are the metrics and what reporting is out there across the organization that we can pull to sort of tell that story? Even risk management, right? So you have to really think of it in a different way, because there's not a lot that, if you stay very focused on those strict compliance and ethics type things, you really don't have enough. You need to look, maybe we'll call it from a culture lens. So that makes a lot of sense to me, but just some ideas about how to get past that.
That's great. Chelsea, is there anything here that stands out to you?
Yeah, I would just say, I think we all feel at a certain level resource constraints, right? Which I think underscores the importance of really relationship building across your companies. Relying on those formal or informal compliance champions to sort of help get your messaging out, help you with, pulling data or whatever you really need to support the compliance function. And then I think it sort of goes hand in hand with siloed departments, right? I think getting a seat at the table in every function will really help you understand how the different functions can work together in really an ethical and compliant way.
Great. Thank you for folks for participating here. There will be one more question and a few more slides, so thank you. All right, so now let's turn our attention to a critical yet often under-leveraged asset, which is your code of conduct. What we've learned is that nearly half of organizations now update their code every year, which is amazing progress. However, here's the challenge. Far fewer are embedding their code into everyday behavior and decision-making. But why does that matter? Because your code isn't just a policy document anymore. It's one of the clearest reflections of your values in action. When done well, it could be a powerful business tool, improving accessibility, boosting engagement, aligning teams across functions. What our clients are telling us is that their code of conduct should be seen as an extension of their brand, of their website. We're learning more and more that current and prospective employees, current and prospective business partners, current and prospective investors are leaning in and seeing where the alignment is from a code of conduct perspective. So that alignment is getting more strategic and deeper. A well-designed interactive code becomes much more than compliance. It becomes a catalyst for onboarding, for training, for culture, and for leadership buy-in. So, Kim, I'm going to start with you, but the question for the audience isn't just, do you have a code? The question is, are you using your code to drive behavior and performance? Kim, what are your thoughts here?
I think it's, the code is, as we all know, kind of that cornerstone document, right? From which all of the other policies should fall under. It's great to have a code, but if it's not accessible, if it doesn't come alive, then it's not as impactful as it should be. The code should live and breathe, right? So it should be easy to find, easy to access. Something that I've done in a few companies is made the code something that people can have on their desk, right? Put together a placemat that highlights the high level categories or sections of the code and just the basic information, basic things that people should know. And everyone loves it, right? Because it's right there. We've got the code highlights on the front and maybe the behaviors and values on the back. It's something that you can put in conference rooms. People can hang them on desks. You can have them accessible online. You can even display them on monitors around the company, whenever it's aligned with maybe a cultural event or code training, like reminder, and here are the highlights of the training. So I think that's important. And one of the things that you also want to consider incorporating into your code, but also making available as a separate document somewhere, and I mentioned this before, the ethical decision-making framework, because it really is a tool, right? It helps folks understand how to make those decisions. So you want it to be accessible. A few other ideas, you want to consider incorporating some of the larger code concepts into your communications. If there's a cultural event going on or communication around something that fits in the culture bucket, how do we align that with things that are in the code, right? Or categories, topics, information in the code. So weave it into sort of everything that you do. Sometimes folks decide that they want to have on a quarterly basis a specific topic that's in the code and use that topic for lunch and learn or to present at town halls or, team meetings or articles on the intranet, right? Things that make it applicable, show kind of the business application of some of those concepts. And then I already mentioned this several times, but really thinking about aligning with cultural events or major topics that are communicated across the organization.
Accessibility, applicability. There's a third A there. So AAA, Kim.
There you go. Alignment.
There it is.
Let's go with that.
There you go. Thinking on our feet here. Amazing. That's, I mean, so much to talk about there, but accessibility is such an important point. Kim, happy that you really put a little extra emphasis on that. Chelsea, what would you add to Kim's points there?
Yeah, so I think I agree with that all. I think on your accessibility point, right? So accessibility and also simplicity, right? Many of us may have joined organizations and read our codes of conduct and said, there's too much legalese, this is too wordy, this is too long. And if it's too long, our employees are not going to read it, right? So I think shorter is always better, simple is better, bullet points, and really plain language goes a long way. You can apply, you know, the Flesch-Kincaid readability assessment to your code of conduct and really bring it down to a reading level that all of your employees can sort of understand and easily access. And I think that will go a long way, in addition to making sure you translate your code of conduct. I think if you only have an English language code of conduct, your employees may feel that it's sort of US centric or, you know, English centric. And so translating it into the languages that your employees speak, I think is really important. I would also highlight something that Kim said, which is incorporating code concepts into communications, right? So an example is around holiday time, right? You may want to send out a communication about gift giving and receiving, right? Which dovetails with conflicts of interest and, you know, bribery and corruption topics. And so you can really look at times of the year or, to Kim's point, quarterly, depending on, you know, how often you want to communicate these concepts or when it makes sense to do so. But I do think bringing them to life in sort of real world examples goes a long way.
It's amazing.
Neil, can I
Webinar
add
is
just
not a
one
webinar
thing?
without the Flesch-Kincaid being brought out. So thank you for doing that, Chelsea.
You got it.
Kim. Okay, Kim.
I just wanted to add one small thing, and it's just a question for everybody to think about. But if someone says to you, okay, you have a code, how do you know people are following it? Beyond training, right? Because everybody can take a training, but how do you know people are following it and know how to access it and are applying the concepts? So all of the things that we all listed are just ways to do that. But think about that vis-a-vis, you know, your organization and how that would work. So I'll just leave that.
Amazing. As we're talking about the code of conduct being used as a strategic tool, I see a couple questions coming in through the Q&A function. Excuse me, LRN, we're happy to stand ready and talk about what a more engaging, more understanding, more accessible code could look like for you. At the end of the presentation, there'll be some resources to help set up some of that follow-up conversation. But that's something that LRN stands ready to help you with, and we're looking forward to having that level of interaction if and when that time is right. But what I'd like to do is focus on how to use the code of conduct kind of as the hub of that hub and spoke collaboration model that we're talking about, and really be able to most effectively collaborate with cross-functional teams. And I'm going to start my focus here on HR, where culture and conduct truly take shape. Leading organizations are embedding ethics into hiring, onboarding, and performance management. So aligning reviews and incentives with values and holding managers accountable through scorecards. But at the center of all of that effort is the code of conduct. And not just as a policy document, but as a strategic tool. When your code is done right, your code's going to help guide behavior, reinforce those expectations, serve as a foundation for leadership development, cultural alignment, and business decision making. The second piece here, and there's other cross-functional teams for sure, we wanted to highlight 3 of them, but we wanted to talk a little about finance. Why? Because finance is a critical partner in building a culture of accountability. High-performing organizations are using data and analytics to strengthen their internal controls, detect fraud early, and ensure consistent oversight of expense policy exceptions and other finance policies. But your code of conduct does play a key strategic role here. It should help set expectations around financial integrity. It should help guide the decision-making under pressure, help align those day-to-day financial practices with your company's broader values and risk posture. The third piece here from a cross-functional perspective is procurement. This is one of the biggest trends right now because procurement is increasingly on the front lines of ethics and compliance, especially when it comes to third-party risk. High-performing organizations are strengthening due diligence, adding ethics clauses into contracts, embedding their code of conduct into supplier onboarding. A lot of organizations even have our standalone supplier code of conduct. When all of these documents and policies are used strategically, the code becomes more than just internal guidance. It ultimately is going to extend your values and your expectations across your supply chain, helping reduce risk, protect your brand, build stronger, more aligned partnerships. As we wrap up this collaboration and get ready for some insight from Kim and Chelsea, one key takeaway to me stands out based on a lot of LRN's research. Organizations with mature ethics and compliance programs are 3 times more likely to report strong collaboration across functions, across teams. But that's not a coincidence. It's proof that when ethics and compliance is embedded in the business, it becomes a driver of alignment, trust, and performance. Chelsea, I'm going to start with you. Maybe share, if you wouldn't mind, some real world examples here.
Sure. So I'll jump to procurement and just give sort of a few examples on how the compliance function and really our code of conduct can support third-party risk management. To a few comments you made earlier, Neil, I think we need to integrate code principles and requirements into our third-party code of conduct, right? We can use our employee code of conduct and highlight a lot of that in our third-party code of conduct with supplier onboarding and training, with contractual provisions, including compliance with our third-party code of conduct, right? And even into our RFP processes, right? So for example, in addition to requiring our employees to maybe disclose conflicts of interest with potential suppliers or vendors, we may want procurement also to ask those potential suppliers or vendors if there are any conflicts of interest, right? So it sort of goes both ways. And I think by collaborating with procurement on these issues, we can make sure we manage third-party risk and really partner with them in sort of the end-to-end process with our third-party partners.
It's amazing. Love that collaboration there, especially going down the procurement aspect there. Kim, what are your thoughts on this?
I think, we've laid out the major partners here. I think there's some other partners that everyone should also consider. Like, you need a technology partner, right? We're talking about getting data and getting information, and also to sort of help get access to whatever you need access to. Make sure you have a technology partner at the table, depending upon where you sit in your organization and what you do. You want to consider having AML at the table, right? Your anti-money laundering partners. HR is definitely a huge partner. When you think about investigations and getting information about investigations, right? You want to make sure that there's a consistent view across areas that are involved in the investigative process. Like, the hotline generally sits in compliance for a lot of organizations, and compliance may do some of the investigations, or they may triage and send things out, but you want to make sure that we're looking through one lens and that we communicate information across the enterprise, not just, we're seeing this and we're seeing that. What are we seeing collaboratively? So I think that's an important point for the HR collaboration. With respect to scorecards, of course, that's going to impact everybody, particularly senior leaders and most likely covered employees, depending upon the firm you work at. But, in addition to scorecards, you want to make sure that there are goals that help everybody really understand, or help everybody demonstrate that they understand what their roles and responsibilities are from an ethics and compliance perspective. So HR will help with that, and sort of take those results through whatever year-end process that you have or ongoing process. And the onboarding piece, you want to make sure, just like when you go and you interview for a company, you want to make sure that that company aligns with your values and what you think about culture, right? So the company needs to do that as well, right? Are there opportunities to see what Kim Van Dorn thinks about this situation or that situation? And it also gives Kim Van Dorn a sense of what we think and what we're concerned about and what we expect from our employees. So I think these are major cross-functional teams that we should collaborate with and continue to collaborate with, and also think about some others that you can have at the table at your organization.
Yeah, I would add to what Kim just said, which is the IT team is also a really important partner for compliance, right? With the increased use of data for really everything, systems and data, AI growing exponentially, and many of our roles will bleed into sort of AI governance and cybersecurity and data privacy, right? And so I think the IT team is a really important partner when it comes to data management, data privacy, and AI governance.
And I'll give legal a shout out too, because they've been amazing partners, throughout my career, depending upon the role and how they interact with some of our teams. So we'll give legal a shout out too.
These great insight for sure. Great input on some of the Q&A as well. This is not going to be every cross-functional team, but I think the importance is having a seat at the table and knowing the right cross-functional teams to be working with and in what order, for example. So we talked about HR, finance, and procurement today on the slide, but you heard both Kim and Chelsea talk about IT and legal. Someone in the chat talked about sales as a critical partner. Absolutely. And that's what being a true partner and using and thinking about the ethics and compliance program and function as a business driver, not as a cost center. When you have the seats at those tables with those functions, it only increases the likelihood of making that happen. So great insight. Thank you. Thank you for that conversation. Third and final poll question for the audience. Give it about 15 seconds here. Okay. How do you think you can most improve the effectiveness of your company's code of conduct? Chelsea, I'll start with you. Anything here that stands out?
No, I think so this is not surprising to me, right? I think many companies struggle with employee engagement and awareness of the code of conduct. I would highlight a few of the points that Kim and I made earlier and that were on the slide, which is making your code accessible to your employees, making the language simple, bringing real world business specific Q&As into your code of conduct and real world examples to bring it to life and to really tie it to your organization and your sort of business use cases and your values. So no, this is not surprising to me. But yeah, I think it's tough. I think we all struggle with employees and other groups engaging with our code. But I think a lot of what we said during this presentation will be helpful to many organizations.
Agreed. Kim, anything you want to chime in here on briefly?
Not too much. I think, Chelsea hit the nail on the head when she said, these are all the things that we've talked about, and none of this is surprising. The only other thing I would suggest is making sure that when you take your code through the review process, that you have a robust slate of folks who are going to review it and have input on what the code says. I think, you know, the more collaborators you have looking at it, then there's more people who can say, okay, this makes sense, or this is not going to work, or you know, we might want to also include this, but just make sure you have a real robust slate of reviewers from a variety of areas looking at your code. Other than that, I think, you know, the poll results are spot on.
Got it. All right, great. So let's talk about what really moves the needle, and that's connecting ethics and compliance to core business priorities. It's about showing how our work drives speed, efficiency, and trust, how principles like integrity can directly impact outcomes, such as risk reductions, financial performance, employee engagement. And what we do that by focusing on the metrics that matter. And as Kim and Josh were talking about earlier, telling those compelling stories, real world examples of investigations, training, and remediation. This is a data-driven world that we live in. Some folks can argue that data is our biggest asset right now. How can we use data and get our arms around data that matters and tie the data to those stories and use the data to help your function within the organization make the most informed business decisions and use the data to tell that story? And as new challenges emerge, like ESG and AI, compliance leaders are in a prime position to lead, not just protect. So I'm going to start with Chelsea to dig in a little bit more about how to make that business case as clearly and confidently as you can.
Thanks, Neil. So I think to effectively advocate for ethics and compliance, our organizations need to really understand how we can partner with the business to improve ways of working and also help the company avoid risk. And so we've identified 5 key areas where compliance can drive tangible value. First, compliance helps reduce risk by preventing legal issues, protecting our brand reputation, and minimizing internal misconduct through clear ethical standards. Second, ethical business practices contribute to stronger financial performance by lowering legal and operational costs and building investor confidence. Third, companies with strong ethical cultures tend to attract top talent, boost employee morale, and retain people who value trust and integrity. This goes to Kim's earlier point about sort of onboarding and interviewing and the importance of your code of conduct and the values of your company in attracting and retaining employees. Fourth, when we act responsibly and transparently, we build trust with our customers and our consumers, leading to stronger relationships and long-term loyalty. And then finally, ethics can be a true competitive advantage, helping us stand out in the market, stay ahead of regulatory changes, and also drive innovation.
Kim, what are your thoughts here?
Well, I'm going to go back to the column that, you know, we tend to keep touching on, right? And that's metrics that matter and telling the story. I can't stress this enough, right? If you had to go in front of the board, or let's say the audit committee, and they wanted to know, like I said before, how do you know? How do you know, right? Make sure you understand how to tell the story of ethics and compliance at your organization, right? So that's looking at metrics that matter, that's looking at the risk reduction data, training outcomes, cultural impact. And we talked about some of those things, right? So what are the metrics that your peers that you're collaborating with looking at, and what do they say, right? And how do we bundle some of those things to tell a higher level story? And I think I mentioned things like tone at the top, tone at the middle, employee behavior, risk management, right? What metrics will fall under those categories, and what are they saying? You know, one thing that everybody always looks at, issues and issues management. What information are you getting from that process? But you know, it's all about telling the story. It's not just about the numbers. And if they're telling a certain story, what do you do after that, right? It tells you X, Y, and Z. What does that impact? How does that impact your ability to move forward or change things, whether it's training, whether it's behavior, whether it's, it could be anything from soup to nuts in this space. But you need to have that story guide you from a strategic perspective, right? So make sure that you try to make it as robust a story as you can.
That's great. I want to be sensitive to time. I want to make sure we have at least one or two questions answered. And if it's okay, I see one question. There's a bunch that came in, but what's one thing every company can do this year to make their compliance program more impactful? Kim or Chelsea, who would like to go first?
Yeah, I'll
Yeah,
jump
Chelsea.
in and then I'll turn it over to Kim. What's one thing we can do to make our compliance program more impactful? I mean, we've talked about this a number of times throughout this webinar, but use data. I mean, the DOJ, number one, expects us and is guiding us to do so, but really use metrics and data as much as possible. You don't need a full analytics platform. You can use sort of simple tools to track training engagement, hotline trends, or policy acknowledgement rates, which shows proactive oversight and helps you demonstrate your program's effectiveness. To leadership and regulators, you can do a pulse survey and present the results, an employee pulse survey. And, even if HR is holding the survey, sneak some compliance questions in there. And I think it goes a long way when you present it to management or your audit committee or whoever the audience is. So I think definitely using metrics and data more than we have in the past will go a long way.
Yeah,
Kim,
and
anything you
I'll
want to add
add to
there?
that. I'll just get on the pulse survey bandwagon because it is one of the most powerful tools. Um, you know, like Chelsea said, HR does employee survey at most organizations with some frequency. So add questions there or do your own ethics and compliance survey and make sure that your questions are framed in a way that will provide or inform the program and your actions that you want to take, right? And make sure that you share the results, right? You don't have to share like individual situations because that's frowned upon, but share the results so people know that they are taking the time to respond and that you are going to be doing something about it, and share that with senior leaders, share that with the board. I think it's very important.
That's great. Okay, I think we have time for at least one more question. Where do you think the biggest opportunity is to show how compliance drives performance? Maybe Kim, we'll start with you this time.
My gosh, there's so many opportunities.
What's the top one or two?
Let's see. There's so many going through my head right now. I think survey results, very important. I think the combination of collaborating with the business to determine what the goals are for the coming year, like looking at strategies and strategic goals, and knowing, this is what we're all going to do towards this end, right? What are our roles and responsibilities? How are we going to add value to that business goal or that corporate goal?
Chelsea, anything you'd like to add
Yeah, I
there?
would just add that I think the most effective compliance programs are deeply integrated into the business, right? So you can really show your value by becoming your organization's sort of go-to person on a variety of questions that come up. You can create governance around sort of emerging areas, right? AI or ESG. And really, because we're in a really good position where we have sort of tentacles everywhere across the organization. You can sort of show your value by really becoming the sort of the point person on some emerging issues, or at least the go-to person when people really just don't know who to go to.
I'm being told I have time for one more question here. So if you could give your peers one piece of advice about linking compliance to business value, what would it be? Would you like to go first, Chelsea?
Sure. So I would just say understand what each business team does and frame compliance initiatives around sort of what the business cares about, whether it's cost savings or operational efficiency or brand protection, right? Sort of improving the ways of working, and understanding how we can turn sort of regulatory requirements into practical business aligned guidance. So we're not seen as a roadblock, and we're seen as like a partner that's proactively anticipating issues that may arise.
Yeah,
Tim, anything you'd like to add there?
I think that's spot on. You know, and just to add to that, and we mentioned this before, it helps to have a good understanding of roles and responsibilities of what the business does and what compliance does, and what value compliance can add, because the value helps to make the business successful and, you know, helps kind of guide those strategic decisions. So I think Chelsea's assessment or answer of that question is spot on.
Okay, I'm being told we have time for one more question. So this is an interesting one because it kind of gets to some of the heart of what we're talking about. How can a compliance professional be effective when the culture of the organization treats compliance as a tick box exercise and doesn't actually care to live by it?
I'll kick that one off.
Okay.
That's a tone at the top problem. I think, you know, as senior leaders, we need to make sure that it's coming from the top, the expectations. And it may be, and it may not be a problem, but it's, I'm referring to it as an issue, right? It may be that there needs to be clear understanding at the top, the responsibility of compliance, you know, the role that we play, and again, how we can collaborate with the business to make sure that we meet our strategic goals, right? So I think it has to start there. I think there needs to be a lot of education, not just at the top, but again at the middle, so that everybody understands roles and responsibilities, and the fact that we have to have a seat at the table along with our partners, right? I think those things are important, and it's a cultural shift, so it will take time, and I've seen it happen, and it needs to come from leadership.
Anything you'd like to add there, Chelsea?
Yeah, no, I would just, I agree with everything Kim said. And I think that if compliance is seen as like a siloed partner, like a siloed piece of the organization, it could be seen as tick the box, right? You take your annual code of conduct training, that's it. Like you're done. Compliance goes away, right? But if we're sort of embedded into everyday decision making and have a seat at the table at these meetings on you know, important emerging issues or risks around the organization, we won't be seen as a tick box, and we'll be seen as, you know, the partner that's always there to help improve ways of working and help us avoid risk to the organization.
That's how it becomes a profit center right there, Chelsea. That's very sound advice there. We will get to the rest of the questions as part of our follow-up. There's some questions that have a little bit of overlap with each other, so there'll be a bit of a blog post that addresses some of that as well. But all those questions will go answered. If not, in the email as this wraps up, there'll be some subsequent communication as well. So as we get ready to wrap up today's discussion, I thought it'd be interesting to share a few key reflection points on how you, our audience, can potentially reframe and elevate your compliance program from a cost center to a driver of business value. Maybe a few things that you could take back to your desk or your office after we hang up this call. And then the challenge, or I guess the last question I would pose rhetorically is, if your compliance program is already helping people do the right thing, driving trust, helping guide those better decisions and driving better outcomes, why shouldn't it also be seen as a driver of growth, right? So some key reflection points and takeaways for us to go back to our businesses with. As I mentioned earlier, here's some opportunity to interact with some of our resources. This will all be part of the follow-up as well. If you're interested in learning more about LRN Smart Code, our web-based interactive code of conduct, talk about accessibility and interoperability, extending the brand and the website, Smart Code can certainly help with all of those things. In the middle there, LRN's 2025 global study on ethics and compliant program maturity. That's a lot of our source material for some of those statistics that we talked about earlier. So if you're interested in requesting the full study, please interact with that QR code. And then if you want to interact with the LRN in general, there's that contact us on the right-hand side there. But we definitely want to make sure we provide some easy access to useful follow-up information to help continue the conversation. And then I'll say in closing, thank you all for joining us today. We hope this discussion gave you new insights into how ethics and compliance can be more than a safeguard. They could be a strategic asset that helps drive culture, performance, and growth. I can't thank our fantastic speakers and panelists enough. Chelsea and Kim, I wish we had more time together. Time flies when you're having fun. Such strong, sound, sage advice. Your thoughtfulness and preparation is greatly appreciated. Thank you so much for sharing your perspectives and experiences. For me, so many different takeaways, but if there's one takeaway from today, it's that the role of ethics and compliance is expanding. And those who embrace that shift are creating real value for their organizations. As always, LRN is here to support you in that journey. Keep an eye out for the webinar replay and follow-up resources in your inbox soon. The next topic in our webinar series is next month, September 18th, on our 2025 Code of Conduct report on employee insights and emerging trends. Thank you again for spending part of your day with us. This does conclude our webinar for today. Thank you.